Hi everyone, once again, I'm Chris Outson. I'm one of your classmates in Modern Rhetorical Criticism, CMST 620, and today I'm critiquing for Katie Brunner, The Gay Debate and Iconicity, examining Matthew Vine's use of a textual form to establish credibility. Um, First of all, the things that I thought went well. Of course, as always, Katie's paper is well written, very professional, and I really appreciated the organization of the paper. As Katie, you developed the paper, you went in terms of a chronological organization, kind of walking step by step through the paper or through Vine's speech, and I feel like that was really beneficial to your particular focus here. Even dividing it down into those sections was especially helpful. It really helped to kind of focus on the speech in chunks. Very helpful. At first, I did think that a thematic analysis might be appropriate, but I think after reading your paper all the way through, I think that you did the right thing, and a thematic analysis might be more beneficial when you have a chance to develop this paper in a larger context and you have more things to focus on in terms of iconicity, which actually relates to my next point. I think that you did a very, very smart thing in terms of trying not to focus on too many things at once. In actuality, focusing on only one aspect of Matthew's iconicity was very, very smart. And in particular, I think you made a good choice on what to focus on. Credibility, I think, is such an important factor in speeches or in letters or in any form of rhetoric, and we often forget about the fact that it can be analyzed in the text itself and not just on the person. And so I really think you are focusing on something that's very, very smart. I have some more thoughts about your focus on credibility, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So overall, of course, your paper was well done. I felt like you were really starting to draw out some really great ideas. But some thoughts for development or for improvement for you as a scholarly writer, and in particular on this topic. Um, First of all, I felt like I was getting a little bit confused in terms of where your analysis began because you gave us so much contextualization on Matthew's speech. Um, of course, contextualization is absolutely necessary, but I feel like sometimes it's easy to get wrapped up in the contextualization part of it because we love our artifacts and it's so exciting to talk about, when in fact a lot of the contextualization and information that we're going to get to talk about will be in the actual analysis portion. So keep trying to give us only the bare bones of your artifact, where we need to, what we need to know to start the analysis process. And then more details and more exciting stuff is going to come later. So just because there was so much contextualization, I started getting a little bit muddled. In particular, you talked about the audience of the speech a lot, and because this is a close reading, I'm not sure how much audience analysis is appropriate when so much of this is going to be textually based, especially for a concept like iconicity, where it is so textually focused. I just didn't quite see the link back to the audience in your analysis focus, and so I wasn't sure that the audience part of it was super necessary. Interesting, absolutely. For example, the discussion about James's rebuttal to Matthew Vine's speech was very, very interesting. But was it important to the iconicity? I'm not totally sure that I saw the necessity link there. So keep that in mind. Think about what's really, really needed for this particular mode of analysis. Remember, rhetorical criticism is just one way of interpreting things. It can be interpreted multiple different ways. So for this mode of interpretation, I didn't quite get that the audience part was necessary. So just my thoughts on that, and maybe I missed some kind of connection in your paper for the audience, but just what I was seeing out of that. Second, your explanation of iconicity I felt like was a little bit I don't want to say surface level, but I felt like I wanted some more details to develop our understanding of the iconicity and the analysis that you were going to be doing. And I think maybe the key to that might have been in the contextualization, maybe a bit less contextualization would have allowed you more space to discuss iconicity in more detail. I also wondered about the example that you used, pulling out Burke from the Leff and Sachs article. I think that was a smart move because it's clearly an example of iconicity analysis done well. And so I think that was appropriate. However, I think that maybe if you had pulled out a smaller quotation, but then dug into more detail to really demonstrate how the thought process and how the analysis process works, would have been very, very beneficial. Because I kind of went into the analysis with a kind of a halfway understanding, I feel, of how the iconicity thought process works. And I did read the Leff and Sachs article, and that helped to make more sense of things. But I still felt like this is such a complex complex term, and it's complex vocabulary, and I applaud you for using it and using it pretty well, quite frankly. But I just still felt like some of the connections weren't quite linking up for me, and I wonder if part of it might have been that I just didn't quite get iconicity as of yet. So I think a little bit more detailed explanation of what iconicity actually is and what that thought process is might have been useful to other scholars who may not be as familiar with the vocabulary and the term. In terms of your analysis, the close reading with particular focus on iconicity. Overall, I thought you were drawing out some very, very good ideas, but there were parts where I felt like the ideas didn't quite link. The pieces are all there, but when you are dealing with such a complex term and such a complex concept and artifact such as this, I feel like you need to have a little bit more detailed explanation of your thought process and how you came to certain conclusions. So I really attached to a quotation from Leff and Sachs on page 216 of the article, where they talked about the idea that studying icons and iconicity is very much so an intuitive and an interpretive process. And so throughout the piece, I wanted to see more of the explanation of your intuitive thought process and the how you actually made it to your particular conclusions. But I wasn't quite getting that. And so it's your intuition, not mine. And so at some point we need to understand how your intuition works. There were a couple of specific places I wanted to draw out because I think they're good examples. So for example, on page 5, up near the top, you mentioned Vine's quotation, "Being gay is not a sin." But then you continue. It takes on an entirely new meaning, representative of the struggle that Vines presents. A gay Christian struggle with who they are and what they believe. Something in my head is telling me that those pieces fit together. But I'm not quite getting that connection between being gay is not a sin and the gay Christian struggle with who they are and what they believe. Like I said, the pieces are there. I feel like there's a logical connection, but it's your logic, it's your intuition. And so I want to understand where that conclusion comes from. What exactly really makes you think that sentence is iconic of the gay Christian struggle? I'm not quite getting that connection there. So a little bit more explicit explanation would have been helpful here. And I don't necessarily think that means more. I think it may just mean really thinking about how you choose to explain the connections. Because actually, you had an example of something that made sense to me on page 7. This was a little bit more towards the bottom. You quoted Vines. "It's because we have a sexual orientation that we're able to fall in love with someone, build a long-term committed relationship with them, and to form a family." You then explain, "The structure of this sentence even follows the time frame of the construction of the family unit, lending to its iconic significance." That explanation sentence to me is very, very clear, and I clearly am able to see that connection between the pieces. Now, maybe to me that's an easier icon to get. Maybe that's something that I would intuitively come to as well. But for some reason, that explanation really, really worked for me, and I could see the thought process and the logic behind that iconic sentence worked. And I wanted a little bit more of that explicit explanation, just like that. Not necessarily long, tedious explanations, but something that really, really just straight up said exactly what the thought process was behind this. I really liked that. There was one other place I saw that I really wanted to develop because I think there's something there, and maybe you touched on it, but I'm not sure if it was part of the iconicity that didn't quite connect, or if it was an idea that you threw out there just to make a comparison, and then suddenly it's clicking. Um, at the top of page 8, you state, in the identification section, Vines personified the, quote, walk a mile in my shoes cliche. You then go on and you discuss his quotation of, if I were to fall in love with someone and those feelings were reciprocated, my only choice would be to walk away, to break my heart, and retreat into isolation, alone. You discussed the significance of alone being separated, you discussed the imagery of desolation, and I think all of that's completely accurate. I don't have any problems with that logic at all. But you never really drew it back to the walk a mile in my shoes cliche. And the fact that you brought that up to me says one of two things. One, either it's a comparison that you are making to make sense of it yourself and to draw something out for the audience just to acclimatize them. Or there's some kind of iconicity going on there that you didn't quite link up. That quotation that he has, that idea of falling in love, the feelings being reciprocated, and then the choice or the path that he has to walk in terms of breaking his heart and retreating into isolation alone, that's a journey. And the whole walk a mile in my shoes cliche is talking about the life journey and asking someone to go along or to understand their particular life journey and life choices. So if you intended that to be a part of the iconicity, then I feel like I wanted you to bring back that cliche more. I wanted to see that. If it was just something you made as a comparison, I think you were onto something brilliant there, maybe without even realizing it. Because the logic isn't and the intuitive process isn't quite drawn out totally in this paragraph, I'm not sure which it is. But I feel like the walk a mile in my shoes is very appropriate for this particular section, and I want to see that developed more. So overall, that's kind of a big thing for me, is that I want to see that more explicit logic really played out for such a complex idea that's going on here. So a couple of things that I wanted to draw as just like a final overarching idea. I was wondering if there's any way, I know that sometimes broad generalizations, that's not what close reading is about, but I wanted to hear some kind of a final word on iconicity and credibility. And I didn't feel like you drew that out towards the end. I wanted to see a little bit more clear how Vine's speech and how these phrases worked as icons towards his credibility. Just an overall summary, really. And I feel like in some ways you struggled throughout the piece to relate it back to credibility. And I can't help but wonder if that's because credibility is such an abstract concept in many ways that it's difficult to do. Which makes me wonder if maybe credibility is not quite the right way to go. The credibility is an important link, but I'm wondering if his identity would have been a stronger focus, because I feel like that's what you were getting at this entire time, but trying to make the link back to credibility. So his identity as a gay Christian, is his piece more iconic of that particular identity? In particular, I'm wondering if some of the phrases or some of the ideas, the whole process of the speech, I can't help but wonder if it's almost like the gay identity development or the coming out process. So just an idea there. Of course, his identity is key to his credibility, so I think there is still a legitimate link there and you're on the right track. But I wonder if allowing yourself to clearly focus on his gay identity and possibly even the coming out process would have been a better fit in terms of allowing yourself to focus and develop those links and see that intuitive thought process in terms of the iconicity. Overall, I felt like you were on a really great path. You have great ideas, they're there, but I think more explicit links and maybe a little shift in focus would have benefited you for this paper. So, things to consider for the future. Of course, you're a strong writer. I think you have good ideas, as always, and I loved reading this paper, just my own thoughts and musings as you continue to develop on this topic.